Hello and welcome to Times Now and all our channels, Mr. Campbell Wilson, CEO of Air India. Pleasure to meet you. How does it feel? Air India, CEO, tough job, tough seat to be sitting in. How do you look at brand Air India?
Goodness, there's a lot to unpack there. How does it feel? It feels like I have the most exciting job in global aviation. This turnaround of Air India is being watched by many. Many people have their expectations, aspirations attached to the turnaround of this business. There's 4 airlines coming together at the same time. There's a huge aircraft order and growth aspiration that we want to fulfill. And there's a new Air India that we want to present to the world and in many more places around the world. So there's certainly a lot happening. It's certainly very exciting, but the journey really has only just begun.
Yes, it's just begun. But let me ask you, Air India evolves all kinds of emotions amongst Indians. It's the national carrier, the national brand, so a lot of nationalism attached to it. On the other hand, on the negative side, there is baggage, there is legacy of tardy performance, tardy services. How do you get both of these together, the good root out the negatives from the legacy and move forward?
Well, it's not an easy process and it's not a quick process, but the great thing is that we have huge support from society, we have huge support from shareholders, and we have huge support from our team. People joined Air India wanting to represent India and Air India on the world stage. They were frustrated by the fact that they couldn't invest the technology or the new aircraft or the product that they themselves knew was necessary to compete with the world's best. But now we have an opportunity to do it, so everyone is very energized around that process. So new aircraft, the 470 aircraft record order that we made, the additional aircraft that we're already in the process of leasing in, the thousands of new staff that we're bringing in with new skills, whom we're training to the highest standards, the new technology we're deploying, the new seats that we're procuring and going to be installing on aircraft next year. All of this is in pursuit of realizing the aspiration not just of staff, but of Indians in India and the diaspora, and in fact everyone in aviation that always saw the potential in Air India that was not quite being realized.
Let me ask you, the Tata Group already had with Singapore Airlines its airline Vistara. You also now have Air India. How does this work for you? And there have been reports of merger that you want between the two airlines. NCLT has cleared it. Where are you on that? And what survives? Which brand name survives, Vistara or Air India?
Well, for the moment, Air India and Vistara are operating as separate entities, and that will continue to be the case. We have competition clearance from the Indian authority to merge, but we don't yet have NCLT. That process is ongoing. But really, there's a lot of investment and work and uplift of Air India that needs to happen before we will contemplate merging the two brands and airlines. Refreshing of the fleet, refreshing of the product. We're bringing in new staff, new catering, and all of those things are work in progress. And so once we have brought Air India to the level that we feel is the equal or perhaps better than Vistara, then we can consider the merger. Vistara is very helpful to have because, especially now that we've got competition clearance and can talk about some sensitive things, there's a lot of learnings we can do because they're a younger airline. They've got the benefit of other shareholder inputs. They don't have some of the baggage that Air India has, and so they can be a catalyst and an accelerant for Air India's transformation. Ultimately, I think that the brand that is most well known around the world, that certainly has the longest history, is Air India. It carries the national name, and so I think in future, perhaps Air India is the brand that we will use internationally going forward. Domestically, I feel the same way, but clearly we'll let time run its course and make sure that Air India is good enough.
That sounds promising, and I think a lot of the Indian diaspora living abroad, I've often heard of them that if they're traveling back to India, they like to use Air India because it comes with the national image, the national patriotic fervor with it. And I'm sure if Air India is the brand internationally that's going to survive. That will come as music to their ears. But you've often said that Air India has had problems as far as some of your grounded aircraft, the spares, etc., etc. Where are you on resolving some of those issues that have held Air India back from really taking on?
But it's no secret that Air India was a financially challenged business for a long time. And so therefore it didn't have the funds and resources to invest in continued upgradation of the product. That has now changed. There is a lot of money that we're spending, not just on the 470 new aircraft or the 36 aircraft we're leasing in, but more than $200 million on refreshing the entire IT infrastructure. More than $200 million we'll be spending with our partners on a new training academy, including some of the largest simulator facilities in the region. $400 million we're expending on completely refitting the interiors of our wide-body aircraft with new seats, new in-flight entertainment, new lavatories, new galleys, so that it is essentially a completely refreshed experience. There's a lot of work that is necessary. There's a lot of it that for the moment is happening behind the scenes, but I think over the next 18 months more and more of it is going to start manifesting in the experience of the customer, and together with the new brand and the new network that we're going to be expanding, it should hopefully start recalibrating people's mindset as to what Air India is and the quality that it represents.
Mr. Campbell, let me also ask you, you talk about buying 470 new aircraft, the refurbishment, and it's beyond refurbishment. It's actually bringing in a whole new way of running the airline. What kind of money are we talking about, and how do you plan to finance this entire move of yours?
Well, I've spoken of some specific numbers in the context of the various investments that we're making. I think the 470 aircraft, list price of some $70 billion US. So I won't talk about funds, numbers beyond that. But in terms of funding that investment, clearly some of it comes from equity, some of it will come from debt, some of it will come from internal cash flows. And so I think beyond that, it's really not appropriate to say in view that we're a private company.
But the fact of the matter is that aviation business in India, world over as well, has had a little bit of a turbulent time. In a market where turbulence is the norm, how do you think that your move is going to be a profitable, business really making sense as far as a private entity is concerned?
Well, the aviation business is a low-margin business. It's also a cyclical one, and that's just the nature of the game that we play. Internationally, I think we've got a great opportunity. India has a huge diaspora, as you've said. It's increasingly the part of a global supply chain story. Geographically, it is perfectly placed to connect different regions of the world, as other neighbouring countries do through their own hubs. And it's a very growing market. It's already the third largest market in some respects from an aviation perspective, growing at 8% a year. It's going to continue to be a driver of global aviation volumes. So macro picture, I think it's a reasonably good outlook for Indian aviation and as a key player in that for Air India. Domestically, it's been a challenging market for a long time. I think there's a number of reasons for that. One was Air India itself, not being a private sector profit-oriented organisation, perhaps inadvertently acted as somewhat of a spoiler to the commercial operation of the market. Secondly, there were many players in the market over the years that perhaps promoter-driven, maybe not so well capitalised, were more focused on cash flow generation than sustainable profit and ultimately massive investment in growing the market. And that has now evolved. Most countries have gone through this same phase of evolution where you have a little bit of sort of chaos, it's not quite so profitable, you end up with some consolidation, you end up with professionalisation, and then you have a more stable market that allows expansion to happen. And I think the same thing is happening in India now, that there is consolidation, there will be increasing professionalisation. Hopefully it becomes a profitable domestic market that allows further investment into the domestic market, but also allows a platform for greater international expansion by Indian airlines, which is ultimately what we want. We want Indian Airlines connecting India to the most important countries and cities in the world. We want Indian travellers to be able to experience Indian Airlines when they travel the world. We want India to have a face to the rest of the world that everyone is proud of and represents the hopes and aspirations. And so that is absolutely what we're pursuing in this rebuilding of Air India.
Let me ask you, the fact is that aviation in India doesn't bring around very pleasant memories. Kingfisher went down under, Vijay Mallya fugitive. Jet Airways went down under, Naresh Goyal today in jail. Other airlines like Go First or SpiceJet have their own problems. In the middle of this, do you really think there are low-cost airlines and there are full-paid airlines, and how this business can actually survive, transcending both worlds, affordability and cutting-edge, facilities for travelers?
Well, the Air India group will have a full service and a low-cost business. Air India Express will be our low-cost business. That's in the process of being created through the amalgamation of the erstwhile Air India Express, which is largely international short haul, with the former Air Asia India, which was domestic focused. That will increasingly be a higher proportion of our domestic operation, because I think the market has spoken, and the India domestic market, for the most part, is predominantly low cost. So we will meet that. But there's clearly metro routes. There's also routes that have high international connectivity that warrant a full service proposition, and that's what the Air India business will be delivering. Internationally, short haul international will be a mix of low cost and full service, so that we meet the different needs of the market. Long haul, it will be almost exclusively full service operated under Air India. This is not an uncommon structure for global aviation. If you look at Australia, you have Qantas and Jetstar. If you look at Singapore, you've got Singapore Airlines and Scoot. If you look at Japan, you've got full service low cost. So what Indian aviation is evolving to is, again, similar to what has been the result of evolution elsewhere.
Do you think it's going to be a duopoly kind of a situation, or do you think there is going to be more competition in the Indian aviation markets?
Well, I think if the Indian aviation market becomes healthy, stable, consistently profitable, it will certainly attract more players and more investment into the market, and that's a good thing. If it continues to be a relatively chaotic, volatile, unhealthy, unprofitable market, then it won't. I think, again, you look at other markets around the world that have gone through this consolidation, and as they've created a stable, healthy environment, it has been good for competition in the long term.
Let me ask you, Air India has often stood for national requirements as well. Whether it was Indian Airlines in the past or Air India, our northeast may not be very lucrative routes, but connectivity is part of the political process that is required. How does Air India handle some of those demands on not so lucrative sectors, but which definitely need to be connected to various parts of the country?
Well, I think there are two components of it. One is for routes that have a clear national development purpose. The UDAN scheme that the government operates is a good structure that supports the establishment of air services, and I think the belief is that it incubates those services to the point that they can stand on its own. That's one part. The second part is the establishment of hubs, because point-to-point traffic might not be sufficient to sustain a service, but if you're augmenting that with people that are connecting beyond or behind, internationally and domestically, it augments the traffic such that we can sustain services that might not otherwise be viable. So as we continue to build a hub, as we build interconnectivity across the Air India group, including full service and low cost, but also across other airline partners that we are building and developing, then it allows for more connectivity domestically as well as internationally. So really it comes down to, can we build a healthy market, good distribution, good product, attract people to fly us, and then use that to invest in further network development.
Mr. Campbell, are you still dealing with some of the challenges of the legacy that you've inherited from a government-owned airline? What are these challenges, and how do you plan to meet them going forward?
Yes, we are dealing with legacy challenges, and that's the same for every business, especially one that there hasn't been the requisite level of investment over the years, not least because during a privatization process it's quite normal that you wouldn't continue to invest very heavily in the business. It's manifest most obviously in aircraft. The interiors of aircraft haven't been refreshed for many years, more than a decade. In-flight entertainment system actually predates the iPhone. These things need refresh, which is why we're committing $400 million and why we're already in the production process for new seats, and why those new seats will start being fitted on the aircraft in the middle of 2024. So that's one manifestation. The other is technology, revenue management system, website, app, systems that are used by employees, facilities that are available to the customer. They haven't kept pace with what other businesses might offer and what customers now expect. So there's a huge investment going into that. People, there was more than a decade in which non-flying staff were not recruited in Air India, which has left succession planning holes, which has left talent gaps, and we're in the process of filling. And fundamentally also, there's a cultural aspect to this too, that it wasn't an organisation that was driven by performance management, by clear KPIs, by consequences for success or for failure. It wasn't necessarily always a meritocracy. There wasn't the training that might have been better placed to bring people up to the understanding of what good looks like and how do we maintain that. So these are legacy issues that we're dealing with, and we are dealing with them, but it takes time. This was a long time in the making, and it's also why our transformation program was pegged at 5 years, because we knew it wouldn't happen overnight.
And 5 years, is that realistic now?
Well, I think behind the scenes, I think we're feeling as though we're tracking ahead of where we expected to be at this point. Bear in mind we're literally 1 year into that process. There's a long way to go, and we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that people have high expectations of us and some impatience that we get there. But no stone is being left unturned, no expenses being spared. We will transform this airline into world class.
What about replacement of talent, people? When it was disinvestment time, it became a political issue. Retrenchment were taboo topics. But in private sector, you've got to be competitive. Is that a drag?
No, it's not a drag. One of the consequences of not recruiting for more than a decade is that the average age of our non-flying employees was around 53 when privatization occurred. And that's an organisation with a retirement age of 58. So it was actually quite critical to bring in a lot of new talent just to keep the business operating, let alone to prepare for a different future. At the same time, we had many employees that they'd spent 30 years with Air India, and things were being changed almost overnight to a private sector way of doing business. And so we did offer a couple of voluntary retirement schemes. They were well subscribed. People chose them obviously voluntarily. And so I think we've made a significant people transition in the most consultative and consensual and mutually beneficial way possible.
You have a long experience in the aviation sector abroad. Tell us something about your own experiences, because handling aviation business in India is a totally different game as compared to the international space. Why don't you tell us about some things that really came up in front of you, and you found that as a huge challenge, and how did you deal with that?
Well, what I faced here really isn't that different to what I've experienced before. This is the 8th country in which I've lived. I've worked for Singapore Airlines, and so I have a very good understanding of what a good airline looks like. When I was with Singapore Airlines, I started up their low-cost business, so I have experience of what a startup feels like, and also transforming an existing business in one of my stints at Singapore Airlines. So all of those are relevant to this context, living in different culture. Air India, in many respects, is almost a startup. It's also a transformation of a legacy business. It is one in which people have great pride, both internal people as well as the external environment. And all of those things are relevant to coming here. I think probably the main difference was that this was a business that had not had the investment for quite some time. And so the scale of the transformation and the expectations and the speed with which people wanted the transformation to occur, probably unprecedented in global aviation. There's a reason why The Economist called this the Everest of corporate turnarounds. Everest of corporate turnarounds.
A good expression. And did it daunt you when you first came in and looked at the extent of change that you needed to bring about?
Not really, because in the process of looking at the opportunity and deciding to come and interacting with Tata Sons and having observed Vistara very closely over the years that I was in Singapore Airlines, there wasn't a great deal of surprises. There's certainly a lot to be done. There are certainly days in which you discover something that you didn't expect. But overall, my expectations were well calibrated when I came, and so it's just been a case of getting on with the job of doing it and turning it around.
And how's India treating you? Living in India, dealing with Indians, over effusive, opinionated, argumentative. What's your first sense of living here and dealing with an Indian business as large as this?
Well, it's all due respect to my dear mother-in-law, but my wife is from Sri Lankan heritage, and so my mother-in-law is lovely and exhibits many of those qualities that you just described. So I'm very well used to it.
Okay. Okay, so you have first-hand experience of opinions and arguments.
Oh, look, Singapore has a huge Indian diaspora.
Okay.
So does New Zealand. I've worked with folks from India in many of my roles. It's wonderful. I mean, people are passionate. People are emotional. People say what they think. People have opinions. I think that's what makes this country great.
Okay, well, let me do a rapid fire round on India. What do you like best about India?
The variety. The fact that you can be in Delhi and then Goa and then the Himalaya, then Kolkata, and they're the same country, but they feel totally different.
And what do you not quite like about India?
Maybe the personal freedom. It's not quite so easy, certainly in Gurgaon, to just go out for an outdoor run somewhere or go for a cycle. It's not quite as conducive as you might find in a...
Just because of the weather?
Weather, infrastructure, traffic. It's just not quite so easy just to go for a run outside.
Okay. What do you like better, working for Singapore Airlines or Air India?
Well, I think the challenge and the excitement and the opportunity to make a difference here is unprecedented.
Fantastic. But let me also ask you. There have been problems. It hasn't been a cakewalk all through, I'm sure. Between May and July, there were problems on flights, cancellations, etc., etc. Then you had problems with the regulator about safety inspections, etc. How do you plan to really travel that space to give safety the importance that it requires, and certainly not great publicity if your safety head is suspended for a month by the DGCA, and bring back professionalism, timeliness, and great flight experience? How do you plan to do that?
Well, let me take those two elements separately, because I don't want the answer to be conflated. In terms of safety, nothing is a higher priority than safety. We're bringing in people with the world's best experience and understanding of what standards should be. We're putting in the necessary IT systems, the necessary training, but fundamentally it's a matter of culture. What is acceptable? What is the level of diligence that's required? What is good enough? And what are the consequences of not doing what you're supposed to do? There's a long history that has informed the culture at Air India. and we've turned it around 180 degrees overnight in terms of moving from one style of operation to a private sector style of operation. And it just takes a while for people perhaps to internalise and adjust and truly understand what that means for their day-to-day work.
Are you saying in Hindi it's called chalta hai attitude? Everything is okay?
Maybe there's a little bit of that. And I think that we just need to make sure that people understand deeply in their bones that now is different. Now there's a level of expectation that people must live up to. There are consequences for not doing it, and that this is not changing. It's not going away. So you have to align with the way the business should be operated. It takes time. It's very disappointing that we've had these issues, but we just have to learn from it and make sure that people step up. With respect to punctuality and such things, again, a lot of this is a consequence of legacy. There hasn't been the investment in the aircraft or the interior product. There is not so much a safety issue, it's a reliability issue. And whether it is procurement of spares, whether it's upgradation of all the components on the aircraft, whether it's training of people, whether it is getting them to go the extra mile rather than just good enough, that's also part of the transformation that we're deeply focused on.
Do you think Air India will be an airline for the future, and in how much time? Because that's your statement that I'm picking up. You made this statement in April that Air India will be an airline for the future. The way you imagined it then, what is the time frame that we're looking at?
So, I mean, we set 5 years for the Vihan transformation program for a reason, because we knew it would take time to address some of the legacy issues, build a platform for growth, then start realizing the manifestation of growth and product improvement and the like. It will take at least 5 years to fully realize, maybe longer. There are certainly some elements that we'll be able to do faster. For example, by the beginning of next financial year, around 1/3 of our wide-body long-haul aircraft will be new interior products, both leased in from outside as well as ones that we've purchased. That will quickly transform as we complete the refit program, which will be complete by 2025. Of the narrow-body fleet, which principally operates domestically and short-haul, 70% or so of those aircraft will be new or newly refurbished by second half, end of 2024. So the external manifestation of Air India's change, I believe, is going to become much more apparent to people over the next 18 months. The past 18 months has been about a lot of behind-the-scenes work. Next 18 months is about bringing that to the customer experience. I have no doubt that we are going to reach the aspiration that we've set for ourselves and that other people expect. It is a matter of when, not if. It's just a question of how long is when, and we're going to make it as quick as possible.
It's a very embarrassing question which I want to ask you in the end. Unruly Passengers, some recent horrible experiences. Is this really only Indian passengers, or does this happen abroad as frequently as we've seen them happening? And how do you train people really to take care of situations like this?
Yeah, I don't have visibility on whether there is the frequency of such issues elsewhere. Certainly it happens elsewhere, and I think that's also why you've seen IATA come out multiple times over the past 18 months talking about unruly passengers and that it is a rising trend worldwide. Air India, perhaps we've had more than our fair share, so we've invested a lot in training people, giving them the confidence of being able to identify, but moreover to take action when they observe something that is not right. I think previously there might have been some reticence to take action because of whatever what happened thereafter. Putting in place a lot of systems and processes to make it easier for people to report when they see incidents and know that they're going to be backed up when it happens. Putting in place processes so that when incidents are reported, actions are taken. Actions are taken to prevent it happening again where possible, but also to take action against misbehaviour. And so there are clear consequences to internal or external parties when something happens that is not appropriate. it's a cultural issue that we need to address, but one that we're absolutely focused on getting right.
Mr. Campbell, in the end, just want to ask you, you're the CEO of Air India. How would you look at Air India today if I were to ask you to give a brand line for Air India? What would you say?
A brand line for what we are today or for what we aspire to be? At the moment, I think we're rising. We've addressed a number of the foundations, but we've not yet reached the level that we want to be. As I say, we've got a lot of investment still to make and a lot that's going to be coming out over the next 18 months. When I look forward to the Air India that we're building, it is going to be a world-class airline touching the most important and significant cities around the world, representing India confidently, representing warmth and hospitality that is so inherent to Indian culture, and ultimately an airline that Indians and friends of India and overseas Indians can be absolutely proud of.
All right, brilliant. So rising India is Air India today, and in the future, I guess, world-class airline that Air India will be. Well, looking forward to that, because as I said, Air India is not just a company, it is associated with the ethos of India. It's been a part of every Indian's nationalism that is attached to it. Obviously, people in India have great expectations from you. Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell Wilson. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.